You are listening to the Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the Overwatch League news and information. The show with Tactical Visor on the statistics and analysis. Here are your hosts, Totally Drunk, Spider, and Slambo.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Overwatch League Network, the podcast with Deadeye on all the latest Overwatch League news, information, and esports analysis. I am your host, Totally Drunk, and tonight on episode 81, we'll be taking a look at the latest in Overwatch League news, let you know which teams are on the rise and fall, reflect on the Overwatch League All-Star festivities that have wrapped up here earlier in the last week, and of course, we'll discuss whether or not this whole 2-2-2 thing should be something that they should look at incorporated in the Overwatch League, and of course, Overwatch as a whole, because there's been a lot of talk about it as of late, and we're going to get down to the nitty-gritty with all of that. So before we can get into the news and introduce you to my co-host, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who is hanging out with us live tonight on Twitch, and of course, thank all of our repeat listeners out there. So as you can tell, my hashtag soulmate is still in the abyss. That, or maybe he had way too much fun on his getaway and he's still trying to recover. It's one of those two, I don't know which. You could flip a coin, whatever. But joining me tonight, as always, is my co-host Spider. And Spider, we're kind of in the lull period for Overwatch League. We're in between stages. There's a lot of chit-chat going on about potential roster swaps, and we know, looks like Toronto is going to be announcing something tomorrow, maybe with Pine involved, we don't know. I mean, if you want to piece together the clues, by all means, but I'm not going to get this Da Vinci Code. But how has this past week been treating you?
Pretty good. I mean, we had the All-Stars go on kind of like middle of last week, so we had like a free weekend, and it worked out really well because the company I work for had like a 20-year anniversary party, and it was this big shindig. Like they put us up in a hotel for a night, so we were basically away all day Friday into Saturday, so it was a pretty busy weekend for me outside of the game. So I did get to catch like the All-Star stuff earlier in the week, which I did appreciate, and it was actually a little more fun and a little more enjoyable than I expected it to be. Like All-Star is always kind of hit or miss, and we'll talk about that later. Beyond that, I've been working on, the account that I've dubbed my least to played account. So I've been leveling that up, getting better at Lucio. I've pretty much established myself as a good Lucio outside of wall riding. So when the workshop drops tomorrow, I am going to be doing like all the Lucio wall riding courses to try to figure out how to not be terrible at that. But, beyond that, just, grinding away, learning what I can. I pieced together like my first lesson that I plan on presenting Thursday. It's going to be like a tank lesson during my stream. So I'll probably do some of the event and then do like a course. So I got that all done. There's a couple more little things that I need to do, but beyond that, I'm ready to go. But what about you, man? How was your last week in Overwatch? I know you had some craziness go on Saturday night.
Yeah, so for starters, Saturday, we did our first of 2 Overwatch League mid-season panels with a ton of other Overwatch League podcasts. We had 10 people all in one video call on Discord, which I've never had that many people in one call. But that was a really good time. It was very chaotic. It was a great time, though. We ran like around 2 hours, and if you guys want to go back and listen to that or check the VOD, it will not only just be on our Twitch page, it's also on our YouTube channel, as well as available on both the Heroes Never Die and the Overwatch League Network feed. So if you want to listen to audio only, you can do that. But we do have another panel coming up this Sunday night, which I will have further details on towards the end of the show. But my week in Overwatch has been pretty good. Pretty excited for the anniversary event to come out tomorrow. We got our first look at the overhyped Diva skin, and we got a badass Winston skin, like a gargoyle one, which looks fantastic. And you might be able to gripe about probably better suited for Halloween, but you know what? I get it that much sooner, so I'm not going to complain. But I'm excited for Workshop and just what that is going to bring for the community and our community game nights. And it's been a good week. The All-Star game, which we'll get into here in a little bit, was fun. There was one particular thing that I got a really good chuckle at in regards to a certain team performing to what I would normally expect from them, and just dropping the ball. But let's go ahead and jump into the news for this week. So first up, we have some ratings news, and it's pretty good news for the Overwatch League after the Stage 2 playoffs. Now, according to the Nielsen ratings, Stage 2 ended with a new viewership record for the 2019 season. And looking across the playoff week, we had a global average minute audience of 545,000. Now, the final match, of course, that was between the San Francisco Shock and the Vancouver Titans, aka the Big Two. That was the one that was broadcasted on ABC. That set the record for the best performing esports broadcasts across the ABC, ESPN, and the Disney linear channels. Now, if you want to compare that to numbers that were more recent, like opening week of season 2, our AMA was at 444,000, but we have yet to reach the peak that we saw for last season's grand finals, when all of the marbles were on the line, because we saw a peak there of the AMA was 861,000. So we'll see whether or not towards the end of the season, whether or not we will be able to match that. But I know kind of going into the season, a lot of us were a little concerned, if we're only going to be seeing GOATS compositions, the viewership wasn't going to be able to sustain. But here we are halfway through the season, and while there haven't been any drastic shifts in the meta, and we had a repeat stage championship, the numbers have actually been getting better, so it's kind of contradicting a lot of the community concerns at the start of the season, which I'm really happy to see. Now, that being said, part of me is still a little worried, barring, if nothing changes, if we'll be able to keep that numbers. But if the Shock and the Titans are just gonna, keep winning and meeting each other in the finals, chances are I don't expect a dip moving forward.
No, this is actually really, really good news. Comparatively, NHL games, your typical NHL game, pulls about 300,000. So this actually did better than most normal hockey games. So that's pretty cool to think about. And I am glad to see that the Twitch viewership wasn't really impacted by it. It took a little bit of a dip, but overall it was still a little above where it normally is, which is typical for playoffs. So all around, I'd call this a complete win, as the current meme goes. But it's nice to see that esports is getting some love in the cable scene, and I just hope moving forward that it continues to grow. And to your GOATs point, the only people that hate GOATs are the pros that play it and Reddit. Most other people don't really care, and as a whole, GOATs is actually pretty easy to enjoy as a spectator compared to some other metas. You can argue on Twitter with me all you want, but from a casual perspective, it's very easy to see two teams run at each other. You may not know what goes on, but it's fairly easy to discern who's winning pretty quickly in most cases. You may not know the intricacies of Zarya bubble timing and Brigitte shield bashing and stuff like that, but it's way easier to follow than Dive, where Tracer, Genji, Winston, D.Va have to converge on a target during a full moon and all of that. So I think GOATS is good as a viewer. I do think that there will be diminishing returns eventually, but I think I kind of agree with. I guess I kind of agree with the Overwatch League standpoint that it's not going to come within one season, because they kind of doubled down on it, which we will talk about later. But it is what it is, and I don't mind watching GOATs. I don't like playing it anymore. I'm tired of playing it, and that's as a Masters player. I can only imagine the GM players and stuff who had to play it months and months on end, and the pro players who play it 8 hours a day. I can understand why they're upset, and I can understand why Reddit's upset, because that's it's like the vocal minority. You have to remember that. So I am not all that surprised that the viewership has gone up because of GOATs. Like I think right now they're not, I guess, connected. Like the meta really doesn't matter too much outside of, you know, some small factors here and there. But overall, it's good news. I mean, I'm not gonna knock a gift horse in the mouth. I know that's not how it goes, but that's how we say it, and it's weird. I'm sorry.
I feel like we are getting admission returns, but it's not from viewership. It's from 17 of the 20 Overwatch League teams in the meta.
I will talk about that later.
But that's besides the point. Moving on, we did get a pretty unexpected tweet sent out from Time Magazine, and they were doing their next generation leaders list, and on the cover was Shanghai Dragons off-tank Geggery, who, the Frog Queen herself. So she earned the nod due to the honor of persevering in esports and becoming the only female player in the Overwatch League, and it went on to detail her journey in Overwatch esports, which had began basically by playing in really small tournaments back in 2016, and this was a little bit after Overwatch's beta test began, and of course it had to go into the cheating accusations when some of the other players accused her of cheating, and they made her, stream in a controlled environment. They had a hand cam, and they basically bet their careers on the fact that Geggery was aim hacking, which was not the case, and then they've never been heard from again. And of course, we see, sometimes like the Diva, logo popping up in some of the rallies over in Korea, and it keeps evolving from there. But this is the only time that we have had an Overwatch League player being profiled by Time Magazine, and it definitely kind of opens up the door to more eyes being on the product, because Time people that read Time Magazine probably aren't your average esports viewer or even know what esports is. So this is actually a pretty big deal. So this is, if you want to talk about reaching a global audience more so than we might be able to do now, I don't think you could really hit too much higher than, a news article on Time Magazine.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. This is a huge, mass market win for Overwatch League. You can get published in, local newspapers and all that stuff, when they do the homestands, but that is nothing near the reach that Time Magazine has, especially when you factor in what you were talking about. The people who read Time magazines are your teacher, your uncle, stuff like that. And it just leads to more conversations, and it just, further promotes Overwatch League. And, it has the upside that it kind of shines the light on that females can make it in the sport. I'm not going to get into that whole argument that, that it's tougher for them. It absolutely is. But beyond that, it does shine a very positive light on the scene. It's kind of like a feel-good story. She overcame this adversity, and I'm just happy for it. I'm happy that they chose someone like this. Geggery worked very hard to get to where she's at, and I couldn't be happier. I could sit here and just ramble how happy I was to read this article, but just go out and read it, and by the end of it, you'll be like, man, I wish Shanghai played Geggery a little more.
I mean, if they want to do that, they would actually have to field a diva, which they haven't been prone to do lately. But who knows? There's always the next stage. Moving on, we do have a lot of the World Cup nominations moving in for the committees out there. So we basically have until May 23rd to vouch who we feel like are going to be the top candidates for, general manager, coach, community leads, all of that good stuff. So we're going to narrow it down to the top candidates with voting taking place between May 30th through June 9th. So I figured, let's do a little bit of background on maybe, who's all in the run-in, or at least some of the bigger names out there. And we'll share our thoughts on who we think would probably be the best fit overall. So let's start with the general manager position for the United States team. I mean, it makes sense to do U.S. We both are from the U.S., as is Slambo, but he's not here to voice his opinion. So first up, we have Ballin from Gladiators, and she is their director of social media and their community. She was also the Team USA 2018 community lead. So trying to take that next step. You have Justin Hughes, who is the Second Wind owner. You also have Kai Kai, the Paris Eternal assistant coach. Then you have T-Bubbles, who is a manager for the Los Angeles Valiant. Now, I don't know about you, Spider, but when I look at just these 4 nominations, Kai Kai is a definite no. I feel like at this point
Shocker.
He's burned way too many bridges.
Yeah, no way that I think Kai Kai will get it. Not to say that he would be bad at it. That's up for a different debate. But yeah, he definitely has not made the amount of friends that he needs to make, nor had enough deposits into PayPal. So with that in mind, I kind of am going with Ballin. She did a good job last year. So out of these 4, that would be who I would choose. T-Bubbles is okay, but I don't know if I'd really trust the team that went 0-7 in the World Cup. So I'm gonna go with Ballin.
I mean, I also wouldn't really trust someone on a team who had an anal emote on Twitch.
There you go.
So there's that too. But anyways, moving on to our potential coaches. We have Deepay from the Gladiators. We have Junkbuck, who is one of the assistant coaches on the San Francisco Shock. We have Optodox, who is the head coach for Angry Titans. Hashtag stay angry. Gotta love that hashtag. We have Arrow, Dallas Fuel head coach, and also the coach of the 2018 team, which underperformed or maybe met expectations. I mean,
under met expectations.
Who knows? We have Harsha, the Vancouver Titans assistant coach and manager. We also have the head coach of the LA Valiant, that being Packin 10. Alright. This one is honestly kind of tough. Like, I feel like off of the bat, I would probably choose between Harsha and Junkbuck. But to be honest, I had never heard of Junkbuck before the nomination. Like, I don't know everyone that's on, the coaching staff, so I'm just not as familiar as it would be with Harsha, who, did a lot of stuff with Over.gg. So regardless of my fandom for Runaway and the Vancouver Titans, just from a name perspective, I would vote for Harsha in this case.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I am going to be blasphemous and definitely not go with Arrow this time. We saw what he did last year, and it undermet expectations, as we said. So we're going to try something new. And while the Gladiators haven't been great, I think I'm going to go with Deepay, just for the sheer fact that if anybody gets in his way, he's going to shoulder check him down. But there are some solid options. Like, you can make an argument for Packing 10, like he has turned the Valiant around, and maybe with more time they could be a better team. So maybe given free reign as a coach, he could do some really good work with a team. But I'm kind of with you. Harsha or Deepay would be my 2 picks, just due to their track records. And while the Gladiators have not won a playoff game, they have constantly been in the contention, which is, better than some of the other names on this list can say.
So that would basically fit the USA narrative. Like, they're in contention, they just can't win, which is very reminiscent of the Gladiators come to playoff time. But luckily, World Cup technically isn't playoff, so who knows? Moving on to the community leads. There's a lot of people here. Some of the notable ones being... honestly, there's quite a few names that you and I are going to be familiar with. You have Fitzy here, who is a content creator. You have Hops, who is the Elo Hell community specialist. You have the Bibbledork, who is a writer. He also created the Contenders_OW Twitter account, which does a lot of Path to Pro tweets. Basically, keeps everyone up to date on contenders across the globe, since... Blizzard does a pretty awful job at marketing that, so That's a huge deal. We have our good friend Kick Tripod over from the Tactical Crouch podcast. You have Jay Harrison, who is the Dallas Fuel social media guy. You also have, a couple other social media guys like Reagan from the Chundu Hunters. You have the LA Glider social media and community manager, Andrew Arcade. And the list kind of like goes on and on. You also have the Franz video editor. So you got a healthy mix of people here. And I will say, like, for me, this is the one that I feel like we still haven't gotten enough out of primarily. Like, there are so many content creators out there, and, I see how much they have on their plate, and it kind of makes me scratch my head why they throw their name in the hat. Like, I know it's great publicity, and some of them do make really stellar content. I just don't think the schedule is going to meet the demand for what we would want in regards to a social media presence. So with that being said, chances are I would be going with someone that has been handling a lot of the social medias for the Overwatch League. But there are so many good options here. But if I were to cast my vote today, I would probably go with Fitzy here. Just because he probably does have the biggest name out of the lot. He's the one that I honestly follow the most out of everyone out of these nominations. And I think he'll do the best job for it.
Oh, dude, man. You stole mine. Yeah, I'm going to double down on Fitzy. Fitzy here at that. Just because I think you're right. I think he puts out good content. He's wholesome. He's funny. And he's pretty down to earth. So I think he would be a great content creator. I think he would be what the US needs to answer like Stylosa or something like that. Somebody who's going to bring like a nice level of energy while hyping it up and, still being kind of goofy. So you can get those like weird chants or strange off the wall videos, but that may be a little cringy at times. But I think every team needs a little bit of that, and I think Fitzy's the one to do it. Looking at the list, the other ones, I like Jay Harrison just because he does a pretty good job on the Fuel social media, so he definitely has that. And Reagan, the Hunter's social media for a Chinese team is pretty poppin'. So that would probably be the other pick. But I'm going to double down and say Fitzy. So if you're going to listen to us, go vote for Fitzy.
Moving on, we did have the Overwatch League International Store opening up today after, halfway through the season. Better late than never. They did say, though, that they were aiming for May, and sure enough, they did hit that mark. Now, I will say, just browsing the International Store, I'm not too impressed for a number of reasons. One, you compare it to what the normal store has, and, on the main store, you basically have, like, 80 items per team. You go over to the International Store, and that number just decreases drastically. They're missing things like... These are only a few things. There's a laundry list of stuff that still is not on the International Store. So here's just a few out of the laundry list. There aren't any of the snapback hats. There's no pendants, no jogger pants, flags, lanyards, button pins, scarves, pullover sweatshirts. The list goes on and on. And part of the reason why it looks so empty is some of the filtering on the International Store is really bad. So one of the big things is the jerseys that are on the International Store. They're there, but they aren't displayed in the buy team option. So you're going to have to kind of work your way around that. But for the most part, it seems like this is a good... it's a start. It's not a good start. So we'll see how long it's going to take in order for some of this other stuff to arrive at the International Store. And I know there's been a lot of complaints about the lack of women's clothing options as well into the International Store. So it's just okay. I mean, obviously, this isn't going to impact us, but it is going to impact a lot of the EU listeners and viewers, as with the same for, anyone over in Asia as well.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I like how you called our store the North. That was a nice dig.
That is our normal store.
Yeah, but that's like me saying this is the primary show on the network. It's like, yeah, maybe, but there are other important
it's,
shows.
It's the one that's released first.
Yep. So, first of all, my problem is the stuff that they actually do sell is still terrible.
Mm-hmm.
It is still terrible quality. Anybody overseas can now be the fine owner of terrible merchandise, just like us in the U.S. But less so, like you said. It is actually easier to list what they do have. They have hats, not hats. They have T-shirts, jerseys, pins, and some miscellaneous. And even the miscellaneous is very miscellaneous. So it is very disappointing. So anybody overseas, get on Twitter, let them know, be like, hey, this is what you made us wait for. Like, Blizzard needs to know that Fanatics is not doing a good job, because there's going to be a time where they have to renew a contract, and I can tell you that they're already in the process of negotiating that, because that stuff's going to start very early, and people have already been very vocal, so much to the point that Into the AM did the All-Star jerseys,
right?
And we don't know any of the details of why that happened, but I can tell you that I am going to buy one of the All-Star jerseys, whereas I am not buying a Season 2 jersey. So that was a good move by Blizzard, and if they see that happening, all this bad stuff will hopefully get corrected. Fanatics, if you're a regular sports fan, already had a bad reputation. So when Blizzard signed them, we were like, "Oh, come on, don't be bad." And then they ruined it. They basically screwed it up like we knew they would. So I am highly disappointed in this. I probably will not buy anything from Fanatics, just to show them that I am that displeased. And I think to be on my soapbox for a minute, I think other people should kind of speak to that as well. Like put your money where your mouth is. Don't just complain. But if you really want something, like I'm not going to judge Ed for buying a Honcho Spark jersey. I'm not going to judge Totem for buying a Vancouver jersey. You should absolutely support the team. But me personally, I'm not. So it's sad to see that not only did International have to wait for a store, they got like a supremely lackluster store. So I am highly disappointed at this, and this could be something that I rant on for a while. So I'm just going to stop now.
So out with the bad, in with the good, in the fact that we have another event coming up that is a really big deal for the Tier 2 scene, and this is one of the 2 Showdown events, which is actually going to be taking place over this weekend. So we have the Pacific Showdown, and this is going to be held in Shanghai, China, with top teams competing from contenders China, Korea, Pacific, and Australia. Now, the way that the formatting works for the Showdown events is this is a double elimination bracket. So to break it down, on Friday, we're going to have the first and a second round of the upper bracket. Saturday, we'll have the first and second round of the lower bracket, as well as the third round of the upper bracket. And then we'll wrap up on Sunday with the lower bracket finals, and then the grand finals. So matches are set to begin each day at 1 p.m. Chinese Standard Time, which is a really awful time for us in the U.S. That's 10 p.m. Pacific Time. That would be, midnight Central, which kind of puts me out. Like, it's not going to be something I'm going to be able to watch live. Then again, it's hard to do that with, contenders Korea or China, for that matter. But it's definitely something that I'm going to be checking out. So if you want to know the teams that are going to be competing in this, you have LGE Hua. They had won contenders China this last season. We have Element Mystic, who did not drop a single map in the contenders Korea playoffs, run in a lot of Doombra compositions, 2-2-2. You have the one winner, who did not win. They finished second in China. You also have Talon Esports, who took first in the Pacific. You have Order, who won in Australia, and then O2 Blast is the final team, and they finished second in Korea. And I'm happy we'll get to see a little bit of Kaiser. Eye of the Kaiser, always a good time. So the opening matches, you have the one winner going up against Talon Esports, with the winner of that facing Element Mystic. And then in the other round 1 match, you have O2 Blast going up against Order, with the winner facing LGE Hua in that second round of the upper bracket. Now, Spider, I know you and I usually don't cover a ton of contender stuff, but we do have some pretty notable team names on here. One of them, is missing because of Runaway. They had a rough weekend. Same weekend that, Titans failed to take home another stage championship. So it's a rough spot for them. But how excited are you to just see the expansion of these Tier 2 events, knowing that there's just a general lack of LAN tournaments out there right now?
I mean, I was pretty hyped when they announced this, so I'm still hyped for it, and I'm definitely going to watch it. Probably like you said, not live because it's even later here on the East Coast. But I am really hyped. I did go back and watch like Element Mystics run most of their matches, and they're highly impressive with their 2-2-2, and that's mostly made an option just because of Sparkle and his Doomfist, but. O2 Blast put up a good fight. They didn't win a map, but they definitely looked like they could. Like it's kind of like the Shanghai thing against the Shock. Shanghai, while they didn't initially take a map the first time they played them, they looked good enough that they could give the Shock a decent run, at least to make Shock's life a little more difficult. And I think LGE could do the same. Not LGE, sorry, O2 Blast. I was looking at LGE's roster. Honestly, as a whole, I don't know much about the Chinese scene, so I'm curious to see what they do, just because they are known for some Chinese cheese, I guess. I was going to say cheeky shenanigans, but I know we use that word quite a lot, so I wanted to say something different. So Chinese cheese, we will go with that. And I'm also curious to see how Australia is doing, because I did not follow them at all. And when you're putting them up against, teams that have the pedigree of O2 Blast and Element Mystic, I'm curious to see how they stack up. So this is, this isn't going to be quite as exciting as the other showdown, but I'm still interested in it. And like you said, Kaiser is one I always enjoy watching. Like I feel like Kaiser is always on the precipice to be signed to Overwatch League, but then he has like a bad season and falls back down. So I'm curious to see how this plays out. And like I said, like you said, we don't watch a whole lot of Tier 2. I know you do more than me, but this is definitely like a good jumping in point, that if you don't watch a whole lot of Tier 2, this is kind of like the fresh reset, because they're from all different divisions around the world. So give it a shot. You may enjoy it.
Yeah, and I will say, if you are kind of getting tired of seeing a lot of 3-3, I highly recommend you watch this event, because a lot of these teams do not run GOATs compositions, so that is definitely something to keep an eye on. And yes, absolutely look out for Sparkle on the Doomfist, because he's going to set up a lot of the initiations for Element Mystic, who, honestly, I still think they'll take this one. I think so. I will say, though, they're not gonna not drop a map throughout the entirety of this, just because you do have the best of the best from all across the globe here. And of course, we will have the other showdown coming up here pretty soon as well. But moving on, I feel like right now is a really good time to kind of sit down and reflect on kind of like the landscape of the Overwatch League. We're kind of at that mid-season point. We got a couple of teams making some moves. We're expecting some additional roster moves. But looking at the landscape, Spider, who do you feel like is on the up, and who are some of the teams that are kind of at a free fall at this point?
All right, so for my trending upward is definitely the Western Overwatch League talent and non-Overwatch League talent. On top of that, just Western talent in general. So, we talked about the Shock taking the win off of the Titans, and going the distance and completing the circle and all of that. But what it really did is it really started a more serious conversation of how mixed rosters might be the future of Overwatch League. Now, Korean focused rosters have always been, the forefront, since NYXL, even before that, since World Cup, going back. But now that we're seeing this, I want to say homogenization, but the field narrowing to the degree that it has, I think there is a serious discussion to be had that mixed rosters are the future, and with the Shock taking this win, I think teams are going to give EU players, NA players and contenders, NA players that got let go, EU players that got let go, in various degrees, a more serious look. So players that were like, why aren't they on Overwatch League teams? And the only thing we could really say was the reason was because most teams focus on Korean rosters. So there's usually very few Western players that are picked up. Like, honestly, when Kib was signed to the Charge, I was surprised, like super surprised. I did not expect that at all, despite how good of a player he is. So, players like Mangachu, Davin, Gods, these players that have always been on the forefront of why aren't they in the Overwatch League conversation, I think are getting a more serious look now, just because of, what the Shock were able to do, and, basically the whole conversation that's going on right now. So I am definitely thinking that we will see more Western players start getting integrated into teams. And while you may always have your Korean focused teams, like I don't see that changing for like NYXL, obviously Florida Mayhem now, and Mayhem Academy and stuff like that. I think mixed rosters will find more success moving forward, and this will only increase until the Korean only teams will probably become a minority. Now granted, I think that's like 3 or 4 years out at least, but I definitely think this might be the start of like a Western renaissance for Overwatch League.
I can see that. As for myself, looking at, I'm going to look at players in particular, and a lot of this was just based on what I saw at the All-Star event. So I'm going to talk about Dogman and Super. Not because of their actual play. I want to talk about them casting some of the All-Star event. So you had Super, who was put on, and, he had some really dry takes, which I thought were hilarious. So for me, just the banter that we got to see from these players was one of my favorite things about the All-Star event this year. And on the fact that, Dogman was also there hyping things up. You also had him being one of the many Overwatch League players that were kind of like cheering people like during the Widowmaker 1v1. There were a lot of things about the All-Star event that added a little bit more fun to it. And, that sort of engagement was definitely kind of at the forefront there. Now, there's always kind of been this discussion about, well, what are pro players going to do once they, hang up the keyboard and mouse? Some of them have casted events in the past. Jake has casted in the past. You see people like Avast doing a lot of that as well. He's doing a lot of streams, doing kind of like taking over the Sideshow role ever since Sideshow came back to the Overwatch League. So I like getting that pro perspective, and I knew with Super, like, he was not going to hold back any punches when it came to just being critical on some of the players. So I'm glad he delivered in that aspect. So those are two players that I'm excited to see kind of jump back into casting. Maybe not right away, because, both of them are also on the rise here as of late, just as players themselves. But I could not have been happier with the performance that they did, kind of being thrown into the spotlight in a different sort of manner.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I did really like Super's like dry wit and just not giving an F when he came to criticizing. But Dogman of the two stole the show for just because he typically does. Like when he gets on the mic or something, he just brings a certain level of energy, and he had almost the same thing, just he was a little more hype. Or hyper, I guess would be a better way to say it. So I did really enjoy that. And Golden Boy was like the perfect guy to pair with both of them, because no matter what they said, Golden Boy could just turn it around and make it even more exciting, or just talk trash with them. So that the whole casting for Talent Takedown was great. The gameplay we'll talk about in a little bit. So trending downward, comes to no surprise of anybody who's listened to this podcast, is 18 out of the 20 Overwatch League teams. So they've pretty much confirmed that there will be no role lock coming. So that basically just makes it the Shock and Titans show until we see something different. There is a possibility for NYXL to re-level up based on the last stage and All Stars. I'm not counting on it currently, but it's possible. They are the closest to rejoining the top group. But if it's gonna stay GOATs for the foreseeable future, which we think it is, because Jeff Kaplan said that there really isn't a whole lot of changes in the works right now, unless that's changed since he said that. We're looking at a future where 3-3 is going to be the rest of Overwatch League, and there's two teams that run 3-3 the best. And if you're not one of those two teams, you're basically fighting for third. Sorry, guys. 18 out of 20, the best you can do is third right now.
But realistically, how many of those do you honestly feel like are competing for that third slot? Because when you kind of like look at the field, you have a lot of teams that are in like that play-in tournament slot, between like 7 through, honestly, it goes like all the way down to like 16, where there's only like a game or two differential.
I would probably say like 8 as a conservative estimate, and maybe 11 as like a optimistic estimate. So there is a wide gap, but I mean, obviously NYXL is the front runner for third right now, pretty clearly. And then you have like the fringe teams that one week look like they could easily be third, like Dallas and
Gladiators.
Gladiators was the other one I was thinking of.
Spark too recently have looked really good, but then they go up against the top teams and then they just look scared.
It's the same. Like all these teams in like, I would honestly say like 4th through, like you said, like 15. It changes so drastically week to week, and it's very like hard to predict, and it's hard to watch. Like as a fuel fan, I'm like, all right, which fuel are we gonna get today? Are we gonna get OGE popping off, or are we gonna get OG feeding? Whereas like the top two teams, you don't have to worry about that. So I would probably say like 10 teams are vying for third right now. You have the Traffic Light Trio bringing up the bottom. So we'll see how stage 3 play out.
Yes, the Traffic Light Trio. That was a pretty good meme. We'll have to repost that one in the Discord later so everyone can see it. But anyways, as for myself, I'm gonna look at some of the affiliate teams that are trending down. So, you got Mayhem Academy, you also got Eternal Academy, and these two in particular I want to talk about because they both did the same thing. So, you have Mayhem Academy, you have Eternal Academy that said, bye, see ya, peace out, we're done. So they dropped their players. I know Mayhem Academy dropped their coaching staff as well. I'm not 100% sure if Eternal did the same, but I know all of the players across both teams are no longer there. So with Mayhem Academy, that leaves players like Paintbrush, Manitin, Epps, Mangachu, and Wub without a home. And I know you name dropped Mangachu earlier. This has always kind of been a player that's been in the discussion, who has kind of been in purgatory, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Like, he's good, but is he Overwatch League caliber? There's a lot of discussion about that. And I feel like right now, this is do or die for Mangachu. If Mangachu does not get signed now, I don't think he's going to make it to the Overwatch League.
No, I would 100% agree with that. I think a lot of these players are in that position. I think Manitin, who was in the Overwatch position, even though he's shown that he's, kind of leveled up and he was doing very well in Contenders. So I would wholeheartedly agree with that statement. So for Mayhem, it kind of looks like, well, okay, they're going to be back for not this upcoming season, but the season after that this year. So are they going to come back with an all-Korean roster? That seems pretty likely, just because of the direction that they are taking with their main roster in the Overwatch League. And, just looking at who is on the Eternal Academy roster, you have players like Zhao Superpluke, who was on Eagle Gaming. You have Hardest, Exowrath. You have some pretty big names from the EU region. And you also had, like, Trispear leaving here recently. Kenzie had retired.
And on top of that, it's worth noting Eternal Academy got relegated to Open Division as an Academy team, which, I mean, talk about a fall from grace, if you've ever seen one. That's a big oof.
Mirroring the trajectory of their Overwatch League team.
Kind of feels that way. So who knows? Maybe Paris Eternal will get relegated next, and they'll go play against Waterloo.
I feel bad for Waterloo having to beat him so badly.
Yeah, it's gonna be pretty rough. So yeah, we'll see whether or not they'll be able to work their way back with completely revamped rosters. But it's always, I know there's always a lot of like movement in the path to pro, and sometimes that does also kind of lean into the academy teams. But I still feel like with the organization back in, it's less likely to happen there. So to see like NRG suddenly poof to Mayhem Academy to now Eternal Academy all in a span of a couple of weeks, it's just not something that I would expect to see from them. It would be more reminiscent of really any other org, since there has been so much shifts there. So I don't know. It's just one of those things. I feel bad for the players. Hopefully Megachu will get picked up, but I am not going to hold my breath, and I was pretty vocal about that on Push the Point, which we recorded on Sunday. But anyways, let's go ahead and move into our post-game discussion, which is going to revolve around the Overwatch League All-Star event. So let's start by talking about the talent takedown, which honestly was just absolute domination by Bren. I mean,
speaking of evolving, the Brenji has evolved into the Brito Maker.
Yeah, Reinforce wasn't there, which just allowed Bren to be unleashed. And he was an absolute nightmare. You had Achilleos on the Pacific All-Stars, who was trying his damnedest to 1v1 Widow Bren, and that did not happen. He just got bodied. He kept trying to play Widow, and he kept getting bodied, and it just kind of makes you think, well, after the first couple of times, you probably should have switched, but, he couldn't do that. He couldn't swallow his pride, and Bren just went absolute wild, so much to the point that his head could not be contained with his performance. I know, like, Captain Planet was doing a lot of the stats for the event, and, they were saying, like, oh, Bren set, like, this Overwatch League record, which is blasphemy. Don't do that. Don't give him the sense of pride there. Because at one point, it got so bad that Bren basically challenged anyone to a Widow 1v1 match, which would happen. It was answered by Gesture from the London Spitfire, their main tank. We got to see that play out. And honestly, like, for me, that Widowmaker 1v1 between Gesture and Bren was probably the best part of the All-Star event. The casting for that was fantastic, because it had Golden Boy and Sideshow. And, Bren, he's a diamond player, so, like, any sort of kill would have been justification for just about any average Overwatch player out there. And he got 2 kills.
Yep.
Which, I don't know how Gesture even let that happen. The first one I was like, okay, that was a fluke. And then it happened again, and I was completely beside myself. But across the board, talent takedown, it's fun. It's not the best Overwatch, but you know what? It's all about the trash talk, seeing the personalities of the casters kind of clash, and it makes for, like, a good broadcast, even if the gameplay that we do see isn't to the normal standards that we're used to seeing in the Overwatch League. It's a good distraction.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Like, that's the whole point of the talent takedown, is it's just a lot of fun. You get to see these casters who are up there judging, these players as they do it, and you get to the players, like in this case Dogman and Super, judge them as they play. And we got Emo Monty, or E-Monty as he was calling itself, walking down the Black Parade and all that stuff. So it was just a lot of fun. Like, we got to see the return of the Puck Fist, but as a whole, like you said, the Pacific team was just so outmatched. Like, and it wasn't just Bren. While Bren was a lot of it, especially on like Watch Point Gibraltar, there really wasn't anybody on the Pacific team that stood out to me. Like none of them really had I guess the ability to on Watchpoint Gibraltar, but even on the other maps, like they kind of just skirted by. The Atlantic team brought in Hex, and I thought Hex did all right, but they ended up losing the match that they brought in Hex, so Hex has caught a little bit of flack for that. But
yeah, Chicago was throwing.
Yeah, basically. So, as a whole, it was just a lot of fun. Like I always enjoy the down, and like you said, most of it is the trash talk, and it's kind of the thing that spawned we need more trash talk in Overwatch League.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm sad that whenever we get actual trash talk in Overwatch League, people push back and they're like, "Oh, he's so toxic. Oh, I can't believe Jane said this," and then they went out and lost and stuff like that. Like, come on, man. They're just trying to have fun and make it a fun experience. Like, and that's why I enjoy the talent takedown. Now, to Bren's Widow 1v1, I wish someday I will be as happy as Bren was when he got that first kill on Gesture. Holy cow! Like that first kill on Gesture, I think Bren is never gonna forget. He talks a big game, and he has this ego on stage. But if you ever watch like Brett actually stream, while he is an over the top guy, he is actually pretty humble, and he kind of knows his skill set. So you can definitely tell like he was playing it up for the camera. And if you watch the like what I learned section at the end of that night, he's very humble. He's basically like, hey, no matter what, if I clap gold players on stage, at the end of the day, a pro player is still a pro player. So he kind of had like the full circle moment, and then of course at the very end he did the final turn, and he was like, you know what, whatever, I'll play him again, I'll play with whatever he wants, maybe next time I'll take 3 maps, maybe next time I'll take 4 maps. And I'm like, and that's what we need. So as a whole, the talent takedown and the resulting 1v1 was probably my favorite moment of the week, outside of I did really enjoy the Widow 1v like through the pro players. I should clarify that.
So my only question is, how often is Bren going to bring up the fact that not only did he get 2 kills on Gesture, but he also put up more points than some of the other Widowmaker 1v1 players?
Oh, he's going to bring that up every chance he gets. And anytime he's doing analysis on the desk, he's going to be like, hey, do you remember that time that I put up more points than Violet? Like, that's why he had a bad game this week.
Exactly. So speaking of the Widowmaker 1v1 tournament, you had last year's champion Sherford was not competing in this one, and I'm pretty sure it was because he just didn't want to be involved. He wanted to give someone else an opportunity. Now, that being said, I know a lot of people were kind of griping about the participants for this year's Widowmaker 1v1. And a lot of people don't seem to know, guys, like, it's the coaches that decide who's going to be participated in these events. We had Violet from the San Francisco Shock, a flex support player in it. We had Jonek in it. Shu was also in it from the Guangzhou Charge. So not all of the players that were in there were Widowmaker players. But that being said, we do see a lot of flex supports switching off to Widow in certain moments. And Violet was a prime example of that, which we saw during the playoffs, because he opened up Watchpoint Gibraltar, getting a couple of key picks, and it kind of just evolved from there. So, outside of that, I will say Nene had some monumental wins in this Widowmaker 1v1 tournament. He definitely upset some of the perceived titans out of the Widowmaker players in this tournament. And, as I mentioned earlier, there were moments where, the crowd would really get into it, because you would see, the players cheering them on. And that definitely brought a lot of fun moments. So, everyone was, cheering on Jonek, and see, everyone else on the other side, just no one being there. And then it would sometimes even flip-flop between each kill if the momentum was shifting back and forth, which I thought was a really nice take. But at the end of the day, it was DM standing tall when all was said and done. We did not get Carpe versus DM, which I know a lot of us were really hoping to see. That didn't happen. But again, Carpe underperformed in a Widowmaker 1v1, and it just seems to be a consistent issue as it's happened back-to-back years. But you know what? I was at least happy to see Nene basically come out and just body people. He's not really in the discussion with New York Excelsiors being their Widowmaker player because they have, Pine, they have Libero, they have Flower, they basically have 5 players on that roster that can play Widowmaker at a very high level, and for whatever reason, Nene just seems to kind of be an afterthought in that regard.
For sure. I mean, for people who have watched him in Contenders, kind of a good Widowmaker, it kind of even usurping Flower through their time in XL2. So I wasn't surprised by this. I was surprised by some of his wins. And, most of his games were fairly close. Really, the only one that wasn't super close, even though it was, kind of close in the end, was the last one. But, he took down Carpe, and then he took down the big boss himself in a matter of basically 1 point. So it could have gone either way very quickly. The game that stood out to me, though, was definitely the Pine versus Jonak. Because you basically had Pine by himself, and then the whole NYXL team, and basically the whole NYXL team minus Libero, because he wasn't in the All-Star games, but the whole NYXL team basically behind Jonak, like cheering him on. And it was like the same thing as Bren. Like every time Jonak got like a kill off of Pine, like his face was like ecstatic and he was elated, and it was like the happiest I've ever seen a person. So that was fun to watch, and I do think like having the teammates behind them did add like a certain amount of fun to it. At the end of the day, I'm like everybody else. I was a little disappointed we didn't get Carpe versus Diem in the finals. But again, like you said, Carpe kind of underperformed. So while Carpe may be a great Widowmaker, he I guess he kind of gets 900 IQ'd out of these 1v1s. So I was disappointed at that, but credit where credit's due. I mean, Diem looked amazing. Like even though Violet isn't a Widowmaker player or isn't a DPS player, Violet actually has played Widowmaker. Diem just dumpstered him. Like it was bad. Like, and there were shots like I can't believe that. I think it was in the finals where Diem just hooks out and lands the shot before he even falls, which is ridiculous. Like the speed that he did that at was the god tier. Like he definitely deserved to win it. I was sad that Surefour didn't participate, but based on his stream and what I've seen recently, he's just very, very frustrated at the fact that A, he's not playing, and B, it's still a tank meta. So I think it's understandable that he was like, well, what does this even matter? Like, at least last season we were playing Widowmaker when I won. Mm-hmm. This doesn't even matter because, you'll see Widowmaker for 3 seconds at the start of a map. And beyond that, you probably won't see her unless it's the Houston Outlaw.
Yeah, I did find it interesting that even in these Widowmaker 1v1s, not everyone is using the utility of the Venom Mine to get the, the image of their enemy, which I thought was peculiar. So you had people that just weren't using it at all, and others were using it to their advantage, and there would be some times where, the opponent, Widowmaker, would be hitting the mine, well, shooting it, actually, and then, the opponent could capitalize on that. So I'm curious to see whether or not more Widowmakers are going to incorporate that, rather than just going for the straight shot and, using the grapple hook and just using the whole toolkit moving forward. So outside of that Widowmaker 1v1 tournament, we also had the arcade modes, which were okay. I will say I did appreciate the cheap plugs for Heroes Never Die, despite the fact that the arcade mode was actually Healers Never Die, and that's how it was on the Twitter poll, and that's how it was in all the articles for the All-Star event. But you know what? If you want to plug Heroes Never Die, by all means, I'm not going to stop you. Now that being said, we do know on tomorrow we are going to have the introduction of the workshop mode, and I really hope moving forward they are going to incorporate that into the All-Star game in particular with the arcade modes, because you can get a lot more wacky things with the workshop than you can just normally in the game. So I would really love to see like gun game being played in the All-Star game. You know, that probably being one of the best options for any sort of free-for-all deathmatch, which really lets these players kind of flex their muscle on multiple heroes that, you know, we honestly normally wouldn't ever get to see out of them. So I really hope we see the incorporation of workshop modes, whether it's like split between workshop modes and arcade modes, or whether they just go entirely with workshop modes. Give us the option to, you know, send in import codes that you guys can use for modes for the All-Star game. I feel like that's like the best potential way to get even more like fan engagement for the All-Star game and bring more eyes to the product. Not just more eyes on the Twitch stream, but also more eyes on workshop modes as a whole, because that casual experience and engagement is going to take things pretty far for not only the league, but for the game itself.
Yeah, I think that would be a fun way to do it, is have like a all-star contest where you can submit workshop modes, and you know, the one that they pick, you get something for, you know, leave it up to them. Jersey, whatever, they have so many options. BlizzBucks, you know, get paid the same as some contenders teams, stuff like that. Oh, I think that's a great idea. Like, I think, you know, just have a contest, be like, hey, submit your workshop modes. Obviously nothing too abstract, like find the zombie hiding in the corner, off map type map modes, but something more straightforward, like gun game, or like the floor is rubber, or something like that. So I think that's gonna come in the future, and then, you know, maybe do the arcade modes down the you know, the rest of the ticket. You know, most of them didn't really stand out to me. The heroes never die, the healers never die, whatever mode was fun, but it basically came down to who had the better Baptiste, because Baptiste was the one really doing the work in that one. The Hanzo versus Genji one was okay, but there was a clear level of player caliber on one team that just kind of outshined the other team. Even though the Pacific team tried their best and they had one of the best Hanzos in the league, you could tell that he was kind of ice skating uphill at that point. The one that I honestly enjoyed the most was the McCree's, like the High Noon, just because of the sheer fact that I don't know if they planned this before the fact, but all of the McCrees held their ultimates until one would set it off, and then they would all set it off, and that happened multiple times during the round. So you'd see like 12 McCrees High Nooning and them just dropping left and right, and it was hilarious. And you got to see the return of Pine on McCree. The head scratcher moment for me was the terrible damage where the Pacific team decided to field a team of all tanks in the damage mode, which was okay. Like, the result was basically what we expected it to be, because the other team fielded 2 tanks and the rest DPS, and that team won. Go figure. That DPS players are better at playing at DPS than tank players. You know, as a whole, this is probably my least favorite, but I still enjoyed most of them. Like, I don't regret watching them like I did some of the games last year.
So moving on, we also had the official All-Star game. So we saw the Atlantic All-Stars going up against the Pacific All-Stars, and just as a reminder, every All-Star had to compete in the span of this series. Now, something that I was alluded to earlier, for me, the best thing that happened was definitely when Atlantic was like, you know what, let's just throw New York Excelsior out there, right? And we are going to pair NYXL with Profit as their 6th person. And, you know, of course, things do not go as planned for New York Excelsior. They come in and they end up losing. I mean, I couldn't think of anything to fit the script better than NYXL getting on stage and dropping the ball. Whether or not they were seriously trying or not, you know, remains to be seen. But it comes to show you can have even someone as flexible as Profit just mold him into NYXL and it will still find a way to lose. Now, outside of that, obviously the most notable thing to happen was the fact that nobody was going to run 3-3. We saw a lot of 2-2-2, which was a healthy and refreshing change of pace. And it just hurts inside knowing that we are not going to get that anymore.
We all died a little inside watching that. Yeah, I mean, this is like, what does Uber say? 10D underwater mahjong level of sandbagging. Mm-hmm. The fact that you could field a whole roster in a all-star game with one of the most talented players in the league in the flex spot, and you still lost. That was impressive to me. Like that, I when that happened, I was like, I don't know how to feel anymore, because there was no way they should have lost that match, other than the dreaded S word. Beyond that, Atlantic pretty much ran through Pacific. Like it really wasn't close. Like Pacific took one map, and that was the map we talked about. Mm-hmm. But as a whole, the All-Star game was fairly lackluster. Like I will say that there were definitely some, as a Dallas Fuel fan, OG did not put on his best showing, and that almost wasn't entirely his fault, because every time he went to do something, he was put to sleep. So I don't know if I can really pin that on him, because those Annas were nailing some ridiculous sleep darts, especially Jonak and Shu were ridiculous with their sleep darts. So I hope we see more Ana come into play, because that was fun to watch. But beyond that, it was okay. It is basically the perfect antithesis of a pro sport all-star game. Something that you put on in the background and say, oh, that was kind of cool, and then just go back to doing what you were doing.
Right. So with that being said, we are looking ahead to Stage 3. We still got way too long to wait. We still got a couple of weeks, unfortunately, but let's go ahead and move into our main discussion. Now, it's important to note, there's been a lot of talk about the introduction of 2-2-2, whether it is going to be in the Overwatch or the Overwatch League. Now, this was first reported back by Slasher on one of the podcasts, saying that they were going to look at incorporating 2-2-2 in the Overwatch League before it would make its way to live servers. And we do know that, our dev and savior, Papa Jeffy Capcap, praise him, he has been saying on multiple occasions that the devs are on board with this and are actively looking into it, but have not set any sort of timetable. Now, we do know that there's some pretty big social feature coming in summer. What that feature is, we don't know. Maybe 2-2-2 is going to be a part of that, or just, a general role queue, having separate SRs based on what you're playing, whether it's tank, damage, or support. But Stage 3 is on the horizon, and we haven't heard any concrete information from the Overwatch League about whether or not there are going to be any changes incorporated with this stage. Now, there was a report from Halo of Thoughts here this past week that said that the Overwatch League is basically trying to squash all of the 2-2-2 rumors going around, which included the Houston Outlaws sending out a tweet that they were trying to, summon 2-2-2. And the Overwatch League made them delete that tweet within, an hour or so. So by the looks of it, it seems that 2-2-2 is unlikely for sure to happen for Stage 3. And honestly, it doesn't look like we're going to be getting 2-2-2 at all this season. So with that in mind, let's take a closer look at kind of the landscape of the Overwatch League in the current meta. That being, of course, 3-3 or GOATs, depending on how you want to put it. And we'll kind of, evolve our discussion from there from, maybe, the player perspective and even, the viewer perspective. Now, you and I have talked a lot about the big two. You joked earlier about the other 18 teams being on the downside here, knowing that, we're not going to be getting any changes. And I feel like a lot of the discussion, at least right now, isn't about the direction of the game or balance changes. A lot of it is just built around the fact that there's such a clear cut between the top two teams and the rest of the league. If there were, 6, 8 teams in the discussion for being the best team in the league, I feel like a lot of the talk would be, I'm not going to say muted entirely, but it would definitely be a lot calmer than what it is in its current iteration. And since the Titans and the Shock have basically been running shot through everyone, we're kind of in this position now where if we aren't going to see any changes for Stage 3, it's almost a foregone conclusion that the match between the Titans and the Shock at the end of Stage 3 is going to be inevitable. So it kind of makes you feel like, well, cool, we're entering a new stage, but at the end of the stage, we're not going to be seeing anything different or seeing things pan out outside of the likely scenario, which does pair those two again, and who knows who's going to get the better of the next exchange, since they are basically on that same level at this point. But for these other 16 teams, 17 teams, 18 teams, however many you want to put bundled up together, no matter how long you give these teams, I don't foresee a future where all of a sudden the Houston Outlaws are going to be able to compete against a team like New York, or Vancouver, or the Shock. Sure, they might get better, and it will only happen in small increments, but they're not going to be able to get there even if you give them the rest of the season.
Absolutely. Like, I was definitely joking earlier. I said the 18 teams fighting the upward battle to get out of third place. But not really. Like, we talk about it more and more, and you're absolutely right. Like, if we continue to play 3-3, and that is the dominant meta in Overwatch League, it's hard to see a world where it's not a Shock Titans final. It's possible. Like, there's always an upset potential, but it's getting further and further away, just because of these two teams are doing so well. Like I said, NYXO has a chance. They have shown to be capable of it. And I think there are other teams out there that have the ability, maybe by the end of Stage 3, maybe Stage 4, to maybe contest them. I don't know if it'll be enough to beat them, but at least, stop dropping, all 4 maps type of thing to them. But it is sad to see, going into Stage 3 that we are going to be stuck in 3-3. And, I had talked earlier about how Reddit and, the pros dislike 3-3. And even though it is a decent, enjoyable viewer experience, as somebody who talks about it every week, I am tired of talking about it. And I thought this was the perfect time to introduce 2-2 to, this, it could bring something fresh. I, as a whole, believe 2-2 role lock would only benefit the game in all aspects, everything from ladder to the pro scene. So I am sad to see that we are going into 3-3, and it is the Shock and Titans and everyone else. Like, that's basically the world we live in right now. That could change by the end of Stage 3. Maybe we're gonna have 4 teams in the discussion, but I don't think it's ever gonna be to that level, like you said, where we're talking about 6 teams, 8 teams. Maybe half the league could possibly do it, and that's how it was last year with dive meta. Even though we were in, the same meta, it fluctuated heavily. I mean, look at teams like Philadelphia, even London. They have shown that while they improve here and there, and they have their ups and downs weeks, it still doesn't matter, because their up weeks are never close to, a Shock average week or a Titan average week. And I think you're right. I think that's where the discussion comes from, is, these peaks and valleys that teams have. The peaks aren't close to the valleys of the top teams, and that's where we're seeing this kind of stagnation. And it's I can argue both sides of it, but as someone who talks about it every week, it is a little disappointing.
Right, and I do quickly want to point out something that was said in our Twitch chat from Trenchfoot. It says they don't even need to make it 2-2-2, they could just make it so that you need to have at least one of each role on your team. That way teams could still run 3 DPS compositions. And that's true. That's absolutely right, because, you just look at the Chinese teams in the Overwatch League who do tend to run a lot of triple DPS compositions. So if you incorporate something like 2-2-2, that would negatively impact them more so than, honestly, the rest of the other teams in the league, because not all of them are running these triple DPS compositions. It's primarily the Chinese teams, because that's their flavor, that's their meta that, they've learned in their region, and that's why, you look at the Pacific regions as a whole. That's why a lot of attention is being drawn to them. That's also why the Pacific Showdown is, like, a primary example of, what you can expect to see, like, should 2-2-2 ever happen in the Overwatch League.
Yeah, that's actually to that point. That's actually what I was talking about with a lot of friends the other day. Is my side idea to that is to just cap every role at 2, because you get almost the same benefit of having at least one of every role, but not cap it at 2. I forget. Cap tanks and healers at 2. So you can run as many DPS as you want. I should have clarified that, because capping it at 2 is 2-2-2. But yeah, capping tanks and healers at 2, because then you still are able to do the stall comps. You still are able to do the cheesy comps, but you get rid of the whole 3-3. So I think, maybe for ladder they hard institute a 2-2-2. I think that is the way to do it on ladder. Maybe relax it after like 4 minutes of the game have been played or something. Like they can make a pretty easy rule that, like, after 4 minutes or in the last 30 seconds or something, just you can do whatever you want. But that's for Blizzard to decide. But I think for ladder they have to hard lock 2-2-2. But for pro play, I think that's a very good idea. Just one of every role, and then you can still kind of do it. You do kind of run into some 3-3 type comps that way if you have to guarantee one role, because then they can still do like 3 tanks, 2 healers, and like a DPS.
They'll just run Sombra Goats.
Right, basically. So there is some wiggle room there to still get the 3-3 type gameplay, but I think that's a very good idea.
So, outside of that, looking at a player's perspective here, for the pro players, we're in a situation now where, obviously, there are a lot of players that are affected by this current meta, because, you have a lot of hit scan players who have been practicing particular roles, some honestly going on like 5+ years, even dating back to prior games before Overwatch, where now all of a sudden they don't have the same amount of value that they would have in a different meta. You have other players who are forced to basically play off meta, off what they normally play. So, you have someone like Hydration for the LA Gladiators, who has honestly probably been negatively impacted the most out of players that are actually playing every game. He's basically a brig bot. You can say the same for Zachary for the Dallas Fuel. You can say the same thing for EQO from the Philadelphia Fusion. And you have like someone like Hoxel, who, honestly probably is one of the better Brigidas in the league, but then you don't get to see him play his primary role, which would be projectile, so we're not getting to see him play Genji outside of the All-Star event. Now on the other side, like, you just have players that just aren't playing at all. You had Surefour right now isn't seeing play because of I mean, honestly, Decay, he's just too good. Yep. But you have players that were household names last year who are either playing Brig or aren't playing at all. You have you have players like Sabiobi, who has not seen play. There are so many big names that are just not in discussion because of the direction that is currently in the Overwatch League. And at the end of the day, as a spectator, like, I want to see players playing the role that they have been practicing, because that's how you get the best Overwatch and the best viewing experience. And just seeing 3-3, there are more times when it's hard to watch than when it's good to watch, because you have a couple of teams that know how to play 3-3, and then you have a lot of teams trying to play 3-3, and there is such a clear-cut difference between the teams that it's pretty obvious to know who's good at it and who's not good at it. So regardless of as a viewer, what you find easier to kind of like understand what's going on. There's so many situations that arise that honestly just kind of make the Overwatch League just a mess to watch. And that's not what we want to see. And that's something that could negatively impact the viewership, or the AMA, which we discussed earlier in this podcast, over the course of the season. Now, do I feel like running 3-3 in Stage 3 is going to mean that, hey, we're not going to reach the same AMA? Probably not, because the Titans and the Shock have been the ones being the draws for the Overwatch League, so I don't think that's going to change. But we're getting to the point now where I'm not watching every Overwatch League game, which is something that I never thought I would say, because I've been so invested, and, you know, I did that all last season. I didn't skip a single game. I was watching live every opportunity I could get outside of Fridays, which, you know, is normally the day I can't watch, and I'm in a time frame where it's like, I'm picking and choosing what I feel like is going to be good 3-3 matches, and then the other ones are just kind of an afterthought, so to speak, like some of the players, like EQO right now.
I mean, that's definitely a thing. And that's kind of a natural progression of sports anyway. I mean, even diehard football fans don't typically watch every football game. So I think, you know, using the meta as a reason to stop watching some of the lower tier games is a viable reason. But I think that's naturally going to happen over time anyway. You're going to pick and choose what games you're interested in, and kind of, you know, especially like content creators are going to go back and at least see what happened, like if anything notable happened in the other games. But for the average viewer, I think that's just a natural progression. And I don't think, you know, meta really comes into play for, I would honestly say, probably at least 80% of the people that watch Overwatch League. They're just watching it. They're going to watch their favorite teams. They're going to watch their favorite players. And it stinks that we don't get to see a lot of people's favorite players on their known heroes. But that's every esport. Like there are, you know, League of Legends goes through the same thing. You know, Heroes of the Storm, when it was still a non-classic game, went through the same thing. So, you know, you're gonna have the ebb and flows and stuff like that. Like Blazing Bob says in chat, like you watch, you know, NFL Red Zone to get like the idea of the league. You get the highlights, the fun stuff like that, and you just go to YouTube and, you know, you pick the highlights channel and stuff like that. And I think that's the natural progression. So while I think 222 would quiet Reddit, and it would quiet, you know, some of the pros, and it would quiet us because we'd have something new to talk about and not complain about 3-3 in that aspect, I don't think it's hurting a viewership standpoint for most people. Like I'm sure there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I'm so tired of GOATs, I'm not watching this anymore. But I think that number is insignificant compared to the people that are like, okay, I'm still going to tune in and watch my favorite team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, now another thing that's important to note is, you know, the meta that we're going to get in the pro scene and the meta that's going to reflect in our games is going to be drastically different. And I do want to point out some of the changes that we are seeing on the ladder, because while, yes, there have been major balance changes in the past, we are not seeing a lot of 3-3 on ladder. You know, the vast majority of tanks across the board has been a little bit more prevalent just in variety, so we haven't seen the rise of Orisa and Roadhog compositions on ladder, so, you know, you get that pulled pork combo. And when we look at the meta in regards to, like, pick rates of heroes, I was looking at, you know, what we saw in the Overwatch League the prior week with the DPS, and of course Sombra was the only DPS that was above 10% usage, and then we compare that to what we've seen this prior week on ladder. And of course, all this information I'm pulling from our good buddy Switch from omnicmeta.com, you know, gotta plug it. We have 10 DPS characters on ladder that saw 10% usage or more on ladder. And you just look at that and you're just like, wow, there really is that much more out there as opposed to what we are seeing in the Overwatch League. And when you're playing Overwatch and you're playing ladder, and then you go and you watch the Overwatch League, it is really hard to be able to pull something that you're viewing and adapt it to the games that you're playing, because what you're seeing in the Overwatch League is not the same game that you're actually playing, whether it's just due to the characters being played or just due to the variance of skill between the two, because we're not Overwatch League pros, we're never going to be at that level. But we at least like to see the characters that we are playing actively, or we are seeing more frequently, also being played in the Overwatch League. And in the current meta, that's just not something that we are seeing. So I feel like if we do switch to 2-2-2, it's definitely going to help the overall like crossover between the two. But I also understand the fact that 2-2-2 is a major thing to implement. It's not something that's just going to be patched and then, we'll just see how things sit. I feel like there are going to be balance changes that are going to probably be made in order to make some heroes more viable should 2-2-2 happen. And I don't know if just putting it in the Overwatch League first is necessarily the route to go, but selfishly, I just want to see it just because it would keep things fresh. And I feel like a lot of the discussion outside of what we've been talking about is the fact that there's kind of like this growing concern that if we say, hey, we're going to implement this in Overwatch League, that this is somehow going to negatively impact the league and the teams as a whole. And I don't agree with that sentiment. I feel like while 2-2-2 may affect Titans and the Shock a little bit, I don't think it's going to be drastic, because you have the Shock, who honestly have the deepest roster in the Overwatch League, so should any sort of meta shift happen, they would be able to field one of the elite teams regardless. And then you have the Titans, who pre-Overwatch League, before 3-3 was rampant in Korea and across the globe, they were considered to be the best dive team in the league. So no matter if we're 2-2-2, whether we're in the current meta, there is somewhat of a variety of compositions that we are seeing, but having 3-3 has definitely limited what we are seeing as opposed to what we would see should 2-2-2 arise.
Yeah, and up to this point, I've kind of defended 3-3 and where it's at, but that is the one where I wholeheartedly agree. This is her. Esports traditionally has always thrived when you could watch a pro go do something and then you could go and try to do that yourself. Whether you succeed or not, that doesn't matter. It's the fact that you could take what you're seeing and go do that. Currently, you can't really do that because you can't replicate goats on ladder. Even GMs can't replicate goats on ladder. So that, I think, as a whole, is hurting Overwatch and its player base because there is a certain disconnect between the pros and the ladder experience, and I think that is where 2-2-2 would mostly benefit it. I think as a whole, like I said, like 80%, that doesn't matter to most people, but I think that would generate more viewers. Like, rather than hurt viewership, it would generate viewership because people can go say, oh, I want to see what so-and-so is doing this week. And, oh, that's how he's playing, Doomfist or, stuff like that. And I think that's where a role lock would really shine, is because then you can sit down and you can say, oh, well, my favorite DPS player is this because they typically play this, not my favorite DPS player is this because 2 years ago he was really good at Genji, but now he's stuck in Brig Jail. And I don't get to see him do what I really enjoyed him doing, even though I still like him as a player. It's one of those things. So I think that is my primary argument for 2-2-2. I think that would help increase the viewership. So I am sad still that we are not getting 2-2-2, even though I kind of defended 3-3 earlier. But like all games, we do see an evolution as time goes on, and we start seeing pro players adapt and change things. And it's always been one of those long running discussions in esports, is if you sit there on the same meta for long enough, players will find new, better ways to counter it, and they'll find different strategies, and the meta will naturally evolve. Which is always the argument between should we patch often or should we patch slower and let them try to figure it out. And I think we're starting to see the evolution from outside of regions. I think the problem is Overwatch League is such a contained region that it's going to move at like a glacial pace, and they need to make more patching. Like I don't think you can really wait for Overwatch League to institute these changes like we're seeing in Korea, like Element Mystic did with the 222, or the Chinese cheese or stuff like that. You're going to have teams that try that, but you're not going to have a lot of naturally get to that progression level unless you have a freaking Sparkle on Doomfist. So I think just a roll lock as a whole would be better in most aspects. Like I think it, while I don't think 3-3 hurts the viewing experience, I think 2-2-2 improves the viewing experience. I think it's the best way I can say it. Like there's not a whole lot of negatives to 3-3, but there's a lot more positives to 2-2-2.
Yeah, and it's worth saying, like, I do not personally hate 3-3. Like, I do enjoy watching it. But it has kind of gotten to the point now where I do feel like I have been watching it for an entire season, even outside of Overwatch League, because that's what we saw in the prior seasons of Contenders as well. Now, kind of looking at it with how we are, it's just like, chances are, Titans Shock, they're going to keep playing the same thing. They're going to keep running shot through everyone. New York will probably go as far as the follow-up is going to be able to take them. Now, you did note, like, out of all of the other teams outside of the Titans and the Shock, New York seemed to be the other team that has the highest potential opportunity at leveling up. And we got to see some really great things out of Mono in the Stage 2 playoffs. The problem is, despite how good his shatters were, despite the amount of stuns that he was getting or how many he was landing, the follow-up just wasn't there. So, despite him playing out of his mind and honestly having one of the best series that I've seen played from him, the rest of the NYXL didn't follow through, and it's just kind of got us back to the discussion of they're kind of like on that run below where the Titans and the Shock are. Now, looking back at last year, it is worth noting that basically throughout the entirety of the inaugural season, we did see a lot of dive, and so far we've seen a lot of 3-3. But looking back at last year, we had the introduction of Brigitte in Stage 4, which, we can bring into discussion here because, this was something that kind of changed the landscape, where suddenly a team like, we'll use Dallas Fuel as an example. They're the primary example. They had Mickey, who's not playing right now for different reasons, but Mickey was playing Brigitte. And you had these other teams that were experimenting at the time with Brigitte, getting the feel, testing the water, seeing how impactful she would be. But then you had the Dallas Fuel, who was playing Brigitte above like 60% of the time that they were on stage, which was drastically different than the rest of the league, even so much to the point that it honestly felt like Dallas Fuel played more Brigitte than the rest of the league combined at that point.
At times, it definitely felt like that.
And Dallas Fuel had basically gone from a team that was memed as being the dumpster team, or the dumpster fire team, to suddenly being a challenger, at least for those stage playoffs. And should you implement something like 2-2-2, that narrative can carry over directly, where suddenly a team that has kind of been middle of the pack could start to emerge as a contender, rather than just being someone that's not even in the discussion. And that's really what we want. We don't want to see a league that is just two teams that are just playing out of their mind. We want to see something that is going to be more even keel. And we're not going to get that if there aren't going to be any balance changes introduced. Now, when it comes to major changes, I'll admit, like, if you implement 2-2-2, I feel like that would probably be the biggest change you could ever make to the Overwatch League. And I can understand why they would be hesitant to do it. But, everyone's gonna have different arguments to make about it. And honestly, like this week, or this past week, just, kind of browsing social media, talking to other podcasters, other people in the community, I've seen a lot of us been more vocal, honestly, than we've been since the start of the Overwatch League over this, because we're all kind of in a similar situation where we want what we feel is best for the league, and a lot of us are in basically, like, the same spot, honestly. Like, we all want to see, just a change of pace. We want to see kind of like a wrench thrown into the mix to see how feathers are ruffled and how teams are going to be able to adapt and who's going to be able to flourish or flounder. We want more narrative. And right now, that's just not in the cards. And it's a little disheartening. Like, I would love to be, like, really hyped going into Stage 3, knowing, like, hey, we're going to have some changes, but it's just been radio silence. And if we don't hear something this week, chances are nothing is going to change come Stage 3.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, as a content creator, and I am tired of talking, and it is concerning that we haven't heard anything. But at the end of the day, I don't know. Like, you just see. Here's the thing, right? I've always been a big proponent of these people are paid to play this game. They are paid to practice the game. They are paid to learn about the game. They are paid to know the game on a level that no one else knows, except for other pro players, obviously. So if Blizzard is not wanting to institute change because they feel like it would be sprung on the pro players and they would disrupt everything and stuff like that, I think that's a load of bullshit. I think these players are paid to learn to adapt. I think, you talk about like season long rankings and that. I think teams have to be able to adapt in order to be eligible for a playoffs. And if you're gonna run goats the whole season and then in between the season and the finals make another change, I don't think that's right. So what this says to me is Blizzard doesn't want to do that. They're afraid the pro players, won't adapt, or that it'll throw everything up, and then people will question the legitimacy of the playoffs and stuff like that. Like, you get a whole bunch of different arguments, but at the end of the day, for me, I think that's a stupid reason. I think they need to be making these changes aggressively, and I think the players just need to deal with it. Does it suck that your team is great in one meta and awful in another meta? Yes, it does. But if you're a championship caliber team, you should be able to overcome that, because every team is going through that. Like, it's not, this patch isn't just for the Shock and the Titans. It's 20 teams. So that to me is where I actually get angry about, like, Blizzard not doing anything, because most of the time, like, obviously we're content creators, and I've been known to be like a Blizzard apologist, like, oh well, they obviously think they know what they're doing, and at the end of the day, we have to kind of trust their judgment. But that is the one area where I get mad, because that's what it looks like to me. It looks like they're sitting back and they're like, we don't want to change anything because we're afraid the players will push back. We're afraid, people will start pushing back because they'll say, like, oh well, they were good at 3-3, but now the meta's this and it doesn't matter anymore. So why should their rankings in the previous stages matter? There's like a whole different argument, because we literally ran into that last season. Like, at the end of the playoffs, we were like, oh, this is a completely different meta than that they played basically all season, with the introduction of Brig and double sniper and dive, and things changed and people got really mad at that. Like, again, the vocal minority got really mad at that. So I think Blizzard is a little more tepid this time at making changes, and frankly, that sucks. Like, I wanted 2-2-2 because I wanted it the same reason you did. I wanted that gap between the Shock and the Titans and everyone else to come a little closer. And I wanted to see like the Shock and the Titans adapt and move forward. And then, you would hear less arguments. Like right now, the argument is Shock and the Titans are best 3-3, so they're the championship level teams. Well, what if it was a whole different conversation? It was like they were the best 3-3 team, but now NYXL's back on top because we're back in a dive meta. Can the Shock and Titans adapt and move forward? And that's the conversation we're missing, and that's the part where I get mad. So I wish they would have done 2-2-2, but at the end of the day, it's Blizzard's league, and we're just along for the ride. So I think if they get enough pushback this time, which it's definitely gaining popularity. The vocal minority is growing every day. I think maybe in the future they will make bigger changes, because that was kind of what was promised to us, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like these longer breaks, these vacations where they said so we can look at the game and make balance changes and adjust better, and the players would have more time to acclimate to it. But we haven't seen that. Like stage 1 to stage 2, we got Baptiste and a new map. Okay, yeah, that changed a few things, but as a whole, the actual adjustments to other heroes didn't really change anything. So you would think between stage 2 and stage 3, they would say, okay, well, now we need to make some more radical adjustments. This is the time to do it, and we haven't gotten it. So that part makes me frustrated. So even though I spent the whole show kind of defending 3-3, I don't want people listening to think that I am not frustrated with watching 3-3 and the state of this, because I do want to get that across. Like it is frustrating to me as well.
Right, and with that being said, I know we are running fairly long. So if you are a fan of the 2-2-2 shift, or if you want to see it implemented at another time, please let us know. Reach out to us. You could tweet at us, post in our Discord, Twitch chat, wherever. We would love to hear your thoughts on 2-2-2 and what it would mean for not just the game, but for the Overwatch League as well. But we're going to go ahead and close out the show for tonight. So if you guys want to help us out, the best thing to do is to go leave us a review over on iTunes or your podcasting app of choice. Any sort of feedback or constructive criticism is always welcomed. It will offer us insight on how we can make for a better listening experience for you. If you would like to find additional Overwatch content, be sure to check out Overwatch Recall, where you can find a listing of Overwatch, Overwatch League, Path to Pro, Fantasy Overwatch League content over on our website, which you can find at owlnshow.com/OWRecall. And of course, every Sunday night I release the episodic listings, which are dubbed Weekly Recall, where you can find all of the episodes released from the prior week over on our Twitter and on our website. So if you want to find Overwatch Recall on Twitter, that is at OWRecall. Now, if you would like to support our network further, consider pledging to our Patreon. We have tiers starting at just $1 a month, and you can find more information at patreon.com/OWLnetwork. So I do want to thank our Master and Above patrons. That would be Blaze and Bob, Brendan, and Gabby, in helping our network grow. Thank you so much for your continued support month after month. And just as a reminder, before we shill all of our social media stuff, we are at the mid-season point, and with that, we did have a couple of special things happening. The first of which was recorded last Saturday, so 2 nights ago. We did our first of 2 Overwatch League podcaster panels. Each one has 10 panelists, so this past week, on Saturday, I moderated that one to the best of my ability. I kind of just sat back, let people unwind a bit. It was a good time. So on that one, we had, I modded. We had Howler from Casual OWL Fans, Ryan from the Birdwatchers was there, Adam from the Brofer Watch, Mr. 5K himself, Edenar from Heroes Never Die. You had Deathblow from High Noon, Rob from Omnic Lab, Kel from Overtakes, Melarina from Overwatch League Recap, and Ramses from Push the Point. Now, that is available on our Twitch VODs. It's on our YouTube. It's available to download on podcatchers, whether it's on our Overwatch League Network feed or the Heroes Never Die feed. But we do have a second panel coming up this Saturday at 7:30 p.m. Pacific Time. So that's May 26th. And we will have the Blevins from High Noon. He will be moderating that. He'll be joined by Calder from the Overwatch, Panda from Mayhem Maniacs, Hannah and LP from the Omnic Weekly, Misfit from Overtakes, Spider, you'll be there. We'll also have Blazin' Bob from Overwatch League Recap, Labasco from Push the Point, and Andres from Omnic Lab should be there, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be coming in late because he works late Sundays, but check it out. It'll be a good time.
Yeah, it's gonna be a whole lot of fun. If last week's was anything to go off of, it's gonna be a complete shit. I don't know what we're talking about yet, but it's gonna be fun. I mean, we don't have Edinar there to really sidetrack us like you guys did, and he definitely lived up to his sidetracking ability, especially as the podcast went on. But it's going to be a whole lot of fun. So I can't wait to just sit down and talk with, Blazin' Bob and the Blevins, and all the other people that are going to be on the podcast. Just because, some of them I haven't interacted with before, and it's always fun to see like fresh takes and stuff like that. So I can't wait to, I don't know how much I'm going to get in because there are some, very strong personalities on my panel, and I like to hear what other people say before I jump into judgment. So it's going to be a lot of fun. But with that being said, if you'd like to contact the show, we have a variety of ways to do it. So I'll stop rambling and let you know what those are. If you'd like to email the show is, you can do so at contact@owlnshow.com. The website is www.owlnshow.com. Twitter, surprise, @OWLNshow. YouTube is youtube.com/Overwatch League Network. And then Discord, like Totem said, if you want to talk to us about 222, that's definitely the best place to do it because you're not beholden to character restrictions or anything like that. You can find that at discord.me/OWLNshow. Twitch, if you're listening to the audio, I would highly advise checking out our Twitch channel. We stream a variety of shows all week. It is twitch.tv/OWLNshow. We are a Twitch affiliate, so you can, show a little more support there. You get a nice little emoticon that you can show off. But speaking of our shows, like I said, we have a variety of them. We have our Monday night show, which is the Overwatch League focus show, which is Overwatch League Network, which you're currently listening to. That airs Mondays at 7 p.m. Pacific time. Tuesdays is our fantasy-focused Overwatch show, which is OWL by the numbers. That is, like I said, Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Pacific time. And then Wednesdays, we have the Variety Overwatch show where Ed and R sidetracks on all manner of things, which is Heroes Never Die, and that is 5 p.m. Pacific. And then, we do host streams over the weekend, a variety of times. Like I said, I usually do Thursday night. This Thursday, I will be checking out the event. And then, like I said, I have my first Spider Teaches Overwatch course. And like I said, it's going to be on tanking because that's kind of what I've been focusing on.
Does it start by looking at your DPI?
It absolutely does. There is a whole section in there. And, that when I was talking to Ed and R the other night, if you don't know, I was kind of instructing Ed and R, and, we were light coaching, nothing like a VOD review or anything where I rip him apart. But I was like, hey, I noticed you're really jumpy. What's your DPI? And he said, I don't know. I'm not a computer guy. And I said, all right, what kind of mouse do you have? He's like, oh, I have so-and-so mouse. I was like, well, do you have the software for it? He's like, no. What? I'm like, first of all, it's an MMO mouse. So I'm like, why don't you have the software? Because that basically defeats the whole purpose of having an MMO mouse, because then you can't assign the bajillion buttons to it. Mm-hmm. And then he loaded up the software, and he was like, oh, it says 5,000. And I basically died.
The important thing about this is I can finally understand why when he was Anna and trying to heal me as Winston, why he missed 3 consecutive shots in a row and allowed me to die. It all makes sense now.
So, There is a section in my Thursday course about DPI and sensitivity. Everybody's DPI and sensitivity is different. Yeah, I'm not saying high sensitivity is bad or not bad. It is bad if you're playing hit scan, but as a tank, high DPI and sensitivity is something you can play around. But we will talk more about that on Thursday, so check that out. That will probably be starting at like 10 10 Eastern, so 7 Pacific. And to wrap it all up, I'll just sling our Patreon one more time. It's patreon.com/OWL network. Tiers starting as low as $1 a month. Check it out. If you want to talk to me on Twitter and see my office or just yell at me about 222 or whatever, you could do so at SpiderGD. Slambo, who is still in the abyss and hopefully will be back shortly, you can find him on Twitter. You can send him well wishes and see you soon at Overwatch. And what about you, Totem?
Well, I'm over on Twitter at TumblydrunkCTR, and just a network update for this week. We are not recording OWL by the numbers this week. I am planning on running some event stuff on stream tomorrow, probably around the same time of when we normally record. But again, like Tuesday nights, I usually do my movie stream, so it's not going to be as long as one of the normal streams as a whole. But stop by tomorrow, we'll run some anniversary stuff. We'll see what sort of modes are going to be in the arcade. Maybe we'll get some junk inside, we'll luck out, and we could shoot some monsters.
It'll be a lot of fun. I can't wait to see all the skins and all the fun stuff. And with the workshop coming, we got that. It's going to be a fun week. And you know what this typically means when a PTR closes, a
new one
PTR opens. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that is going to include whatever Jeff Kaplan was talking about. That is going to include the social feature.
I can only hope. But with that being said, guys, thank you so much again for hanging out with us tonight on Overwatch League Network. This has been episode number 81. I've been your host, Simply Drunk, joined, as always, by my co-host, Spider, and we hope to see you back later in the week for either, our host streams or Heroes Never Die on Wednesday, where I guarantee you we're going to spend a healthy amount of time talking about the anniversary event, and maybe even a PTR patch should one drop, since the other one is getting patched to live. So, have a good night, and we will talk to you guys soon. Take care.